Reverend Bill Guthrie called 911 at 7 a.m. on May 14, 1999, his voice panicked and breaking. His wife Sharon wasn't breathing, he said. She was in the bathtub. When paramedics burst through the bathroom door, they found Sharon floating face down in the water, completely unresponsive. But here's what bothered them immediately. Bill stood in the bathroom completely dry in his Sunday clothes. Despite claiming he desperately tried to pull his wife from the tub, the paramedics knew from experience that wrestling with someone in water leaves you soaked. Yet Bill's shirt didn't have a drop on it. Sharon would pass away the next day, never regaining consciousness. The beloved children's minister who handed out Smarties candy every Sunday morning was gone. At first, it looked like a tragic accident. A woman who'd overdosed on sleeping pills and drowned in her own bathtub. But as investigators dug deeper into the respected minister's life, they discovered something dark. Computer searches about drowning and sedatives, a secret affair spanning years, and a forged suicide note created months after Sharon's passing. What really happened in that parsonage bathroom would shock the small town of Woolsey, South Dakota, to its core. Woolsey is the kind of place where everybody knows everybody. Population under 1,000. Dirt roads. The kind of town where the church steeple is the tallest thing for miles around. The United Presbyterian Church sits right in the center of town, and the parsonage, the minister's house, sits right next door. Bill Guthrie had been the pastor there since 1996. He was well respected, known for his biblical knowledge and his way with words. His sermons were thoughtful and engaging. People looked forward to Sunday services, and his wife Sharon was equally beloved. She was the children's minister, and kids absolutely adored her. She'd tell them stories before Bill's sermons, hand out candy, make church fun for the youngest members of the congregation. They seemed like the perfect pastor's family. 33 years of marriage, 3 grown daughters, a life dedicated to faith and service. But on that Friday morning, everything changed. At 7 a.m., Bill called 911. His voice was frantic, breaking, desperate. "My wife, she's not breathing. She's in the bathtub. Please hurry." When paramedics Jim Reynolds and his partner arrived minutes later, they rushed into the bathroom. Sharon was face down in the tub, the water still running, overflowing onto the floor. Her auburn hair spread across the surface like dark seaweed. She wasn't moving, wasn't breathing. Reynolds and his partner immediately pulled her out, moved her to the hallway, and started CPR. They worked frantically, following their training, doing everything they could. And in the process of moving Sharon, lifting her, performing chest compressions, they got completely soaked. Water from the tub, water from Sharon's body. It was everywhere. Their uniforms were drenched. But Reynolds noticed something that bothered him. Bill Guthrie was standing right there in the bathroom, watching them work, and he was completely dry. His clothes showed no signs of water. His hair wasn't wet. There were no damp spots on his shirt or pants. This was strange, really strange. Bill had told the 911 dispatcher that he'd tried desperately to lift Sharon from the tub, that he'd been trying to save her. But if that was true, he should have been soaked. You can't pull someone out of a bathtub, especially someone who's dead weight and unconscious, without getting wet. It's physically impossible. Reynolds filed this observation away in his mind, but didn't say anything. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe Bill had changed clothes after calling 911. Maybe something else had happened that made sense. But that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. At the hospital, doctors managed to restart Sharon's heart. But her brain showed no activity. She'd been without oxygen for too long. Dr. Brad Randall, the attending physician, ran every test, tried everything he could, but there was nothing to be done. Sharon was gone, even though her body was technically still alive. The next day, May 15th, Sharon's family made the heartbreaking decision to take her off life support. She was 54 years old. The funeral was massive. The church was packed. Sharon had touched so many lives, especially the children. Parents brought their kids to say goodbye to the woman who'd made church fun, who'd always had a smile and a piece of candy for them. Bill performed parts of the service himself, his voice steady despite the tears. People whispered about how strong he was being, how devoted he must have been to Sharon to push through his grief and minister to the congregation, even in his darkest hour. But Detective Jerry Lindbergh wasn't at the funeral to mourn. He was there to observe, to watch, to see how people reacted, how Bill reacted, how the family dynamics played out. Because Lindbergh had questions, lots of questions, and the more he learned about the Guthries' marriage, the more those questions multiplied. 3 weeks after Sharon's passing, her daughter Jenna Lou got married. It was the wedding Sharon had been so excited about, the wedding she'd helped plan. Now she'd never see her daughter walk down the aisle. Bill performed the ceremony. He stood at the altar and married his daughter, while the congregation whispered in the pews. Some people thought it was beautiful and brave. Others thought it was strange, unsettling. Lindbergh kept investigating. What Lindbergh discovered shocked the tight-knit community of Woolsey. The respected Reverend Bill Guthrie had been living a double life for years. He'd been having an affair with a woman from his previous church in Nebraska, a woman named Debbie, who had been an elder in that congregation. The affair had started in 1994, when Bill was still pastoring in Orleans, Nebraska. It had continued for 5 years, even after he moved his family to South Dakota in 1996. And here's the part that made Lindbergh's jaw drop. Bill had been telling the church council in Woolsey that he needed to make regular trips back to Nebraska for medical treatment. He said he was seeing a specialist for impotence, a deeply personal medical issue that he claimed was affecting his marriage and his self-esteem. The church council, being compassionate people who trusted their pastor implicitly, had even paid for his mileage. They'd reimbursed him for gas money to drive hundreds of miles round trip, sometimes twice a month, so he could get treatment for this sensitive condition. They felt terrible for their pastor, dealing with such a personal struggle. Some of them had even prayed for him, asking God to heal whatever physical ailment was causing his problems. But Bill wasn't seeing any doctor. He wasn't getting any treatment. There was no medical condition. He was meeting Debbie in cheap motels across state lines, in anonymous rooms along Highway 81, in places where nobody from either congregation would recognize them. Having the very active, intimate relationship that he claimed to be medically incapable of having with his own wife. The hypocrisy was staggering. Here was a man who preached about honesty, about fidelity, about the sanctity of marriage vows. A man who counseled troubled couples, who performed wedding ceremonies, who spoke with authority about commitment and trust. And all the while, he was living a complete lie. The affair had ended recently, just months before Sharon's passing. Debbie had grown tired of the secrecy, tired of stolen hours in anonymous motel rooms where she had to sneak in through side doors, tired of being hidden away like a shameful secret. She'd actually left her own husband, hoping that Bill would do the same so that they could be together publicly. She wanted to go to movies, to have dinner at restaurants, to hold hands in public without fear, to build a real life together instead of just meeting for a few hours in dark rooms. But Bill had refused. He told Debbie that divorcing Sharon would end his career as a minister The Presbyterian Church might defrock him. His reputation, which he'd spent decades building, would be destroyed. The congregation that looked up to him would turn away in disgust. His daughters would be humiliated. He couldn't risk it. His career, his image, his standing in the community, these things were more important to him than the woman he claimed to love. So Debbie had broken things off, tired of being second place to Bill's ambitions. But according to what she later told investigators, she'd mentioned that maybe they could get back together if Bill ever divorced Sharon. If he was free, if there were no obstacles. Think about that for a second. Here's Bill, trapped in a marriage he clearly wanted out of, with a mistress he wanted to be with, and his career, the thing he'd dedicated his entire adult life to, hanging in the balance. Divorce wasn't an option. It would cost him everything he'd built. The respect, the position, the comfortable life in the parsonage. But what if Sharon wasn't around anymore? What if something happened to her? Something that looked accidental. Something that couldn't be traced back to him. Then he'd be free. A grieving widower instead of a disgraced, divorced minister. Someone worthy of sympathy instead of judgment. The wheels in Bill's mind had clearly been turning for some time. Dr. Brad Randall performed Sharon's autopsy on May 16th, the day after she passed away. He was looking for answers. What had caused this seemingly healthy 54-year-old woman to drown in her own bathtub? Randall examined Sharon's body meticulously, looking for any signs that might explain what happened. He checked for head trauma. Maybe she'd slipped and hit her head, knocking herself unconscious before drowning. Nothing. He looked for signs of a seizure or stroke. Nothing. He examined her heart, her lungs, all her major organs. Everything appeared normal for a woman her age. Randall found no signs of physical trauma anywhere on Sharon's body. No bruises that would suggest she'd been held down. No defensive wounds on her hands or arms. No marks around her neck. No injuries that would suggest a struggle or an attack. From a purely physical standpoint, Sharon's body appeared completely normal and healthy. But the toxicology results told a very different story. A disturbing story. Sharon had 3 medications in her system. 2 of them, diazepam and lorazepam, were anti-anxiety medications that she had legitimate prescriptions for. The levels were low, therapeutic, nothing unusual. Medications that many people take to manage stress or anxiety. Nothing alarming there. But the 3rd medication was different, very different. Temazepam, a powerful sedative in the benzodiazepine family. And the level in Sharon's bloodstream was massive, far beyond anything that could be considered therapeutic or even accidental. Randall estimated Sharon had ingested about 20 temazepam capsules, maybe more. The amount was difficult to calculate precisely because of how the drug metabolizes in the body, but it was clearly an enormous dose. This wasn't someone taking a sleeping pill to help them rest. This wasn't someone accidentally taking an extra pill or 2 because they forgot they'd already taken their medication. This was an incapacitating dose that would knock someone out cold within 15 to 20 minutes. To put this in perspective, a normal prescribed dose of temazepam is 1 capsule, 15 to 30 milligrams, taken at bedtime. 20 capsules would be 300 to 600 milligrams. That's enough to render someone completely unconscious, unable to speak, unable to move, unable to protect themselves in any way. Here's the critical thing. Sharon didn't have a prescription for temazepam. Her pharmacy records showed prescriptions for diazepam and lorazepam, but nothing for temazepam. She had no medical reason to have this drug in her possession, let alone to take such a massive amount of it. But her husband Bill did have a prescription for temazepam. Randall's official conclusion: Sharon had drowned because she was incapacitated from the temazepam dose. The drug had rendered her unconscious. She'd been in that bathtub, unable to save herself, unable to even lift her head above water, unable to call for help. The drowning itself was the technical cause of passing, but it was the temazepam that made it possible. The question that haunted everyone involved in the investigation was, how did 20 capsules of Bill's prescription medication end up in Sharon's system? Investigators pulled Bill's pharmacy records. What they found was damning. In late April and early May 1999, just weeks before Sharon's passing, Bill had visited 2 different pharmacies with the same story. He told each one that he'd lost his temazepam prescription and needed a replacement. Now, temazepam is a controlled substance. Pharmacies are supposed to be careful about this kind of thing. But Bill was a respected minister, a man of God, someone people trusted. So both pharmacies filled his prescriptions. Bill walked away with double the prescribed amount of temazepam, 60 capsules instead of 30. And here's what makes this even more suspicious. Temazepam comes in capsule form, capsules that can be easily broken apart, capsules where the powder inside can be dissolved in liquid, capsules that would be virtually undetectable if mixed into someone's favorite drink. Sharon loved chocolate milk. She drank it every night before bed, a comfort ritual she'd had for years. Bill knew this. Everyone in the family knew this. On the morning of May 14th, investigators found an empty chocolate milk glass on Sharon's nightstand. This is where the case gets really disturbing, because investigators seized the church computer, hoping to find evidence of Bill's affair. What they found instead was so much worse. Computer forensic expert Judd Robbins examined the hard drive. Even though someone had deleted files, Robbins had the skills to recover them. And what he discovered made his blood run cold. Dozens of internet searches, all conducted in April 1999, 1 month before Sharon's passing. Someone had been researching sleeping pills extensively. Article after article about temazepam, about its effects, about how much it takes to incapacitate someone. But the searches didn't stop there. There were extensive searches about bathtub accidents, about drowning scenarios, about how to stage a scene, about how investigations work, about what evidence police look for. The last search was completed on April 27th, less than 3 weeks before Sharon drowned in her bathtub. The timeline was chilling. April, extensive computer searches about sedatives and drowning. April 29th, Bill gets his first temazepam prescription filled May 12th and 13th. Bill gets additional prescriptions filled at different pharmacies May 14th. Sharon passes away in the bathtub with massive amounts of temazepam in her system. This wasn't an accident. This was premeditated, planned, researched. Bill and Sharon had 3 daughters, Suzanne, Jenna Lou, and Danielle. When the investigation started pointing toward Bill, the family was torn apart in ways that would never heal. Suzanne, the oldest, began to see the truth. She looked at the evidence, the timeline, the computer searches, and she couldn't deny what it all meant. She agreed to help investigators. In a devastating moment, she wore a wire and confronted her father, trying to get him to admit the truth. The recording captures a heartbreaking conversation. A daughter pleading with her father for honesty, and a father maintaining his innocence, even when faced with undeniable evidence of his lies. But Jenna Lou couldn't accept it. She refused to believe her father was capable of this. She clung to alternative explanations, insisting that her mother might have taken the pills herself. She pointed out that Sharon had accidentally overdosed on Benadryl a few weeks earlier, that maybe her mother was seeking attention, that maybe this was all a terrible misunderstanding. The family was fracturing, and it would only get worse. In August 1999, Bill Guthrie was arrested and charged with first-degree taking of life. The arrest happened on a Sunday morning as he was preparing for church services. The prosecution's theory was methodical and cold. They believed Bill had spent weeks planning the perfect way to eliminate his wife. He'd researched sedatives and drowning scenarios. He'd obtained extra medication through deception. He'd carefully calculated how much temazepam would be needed to knock Sharon unconscious without causing immediate harm. On the morning of May 14th, they believed Bill had crushed the temazepam capsules and mixed the powder into Sharon's chocolate milk. Maybe he'd given it to her the night before or early that morning. Once the medication took effect and Sharon lost consciousness, Bill carried her to the bathroom, placed her in the tub, turned on the water, and watched her drown. Then he waited an appropriate amount of time before calling 911, making sure it would be too late to save her, but not so long that his delay would seem suspicious. It was cold, calculated, evil. But Bill maintained his innocence. He insisted Sharon had taken the pills herself, that this was all a terrible accident, or perhaps even intentional on Sharon's part. The case went to trial in early 2000. The trial was the biggest thing to ever happen in Tiny Woolsey. The courtroom was packed every single day. People came from all over South Dakota to witness it. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. The affair, the pharmacy visits, the computer searches, the toxicology results, the dry clothes on the morning of Sharon's passing. It was overwhelming evidence. Then Bill's defense attorney dropped what he thought would be a nuclear bomb that would destroy the prosecution's case. A suicide note, allegedly written by Sharon. Dated May 13th, one day before she passed away. The note was addressed to Suzanne. In it, Sharon apologized for ruining Suzanne's wedding with a minor argument she'd had with the groom's mother. She expressed concern about family tensions. She seemed to be saying goodbye. Bill claimed he'd found the note weeks after Sharon's passing, hidden in a liturgy book in the church office. He said he'd been heartbroken to discover it, realizing too late that his wife had been suicidal. The note wasn't handwritten. It was entirely typed. No signature, just words on a page that could have been written by anyone. The defense argued this changed everything. Sharon had taken those pills herself. She'd planned her own passing. Bill was innocent. For a moment, doubt crept into the courtroom. What if they'd gotten this wrong? But Judd Robbins wasn't convinced. Something about that suicide note bothered him. So he did what he does best. He examined it forensically. First, he searched the church computer for any trace of the suicide note. He looked through every file, every deleted document, every temporary file. Nothing. If Sharon had typed this note on the church computer, which would make sense since that's where Bill claimed to have found it, there should be some evidence of it. But there was nothing. Then police learned that Bill had given a second computer to his son-in-law just before the trial started. Why would he do that? Why give away a computer right when he's about to go on trial for his life? Robbins examined this second computer, and what he found was devastating for Bill's defense. A document file titled Sharon Note. The formatting was identical to the alleged suicide note. Same margins, same font, same typographical errors. But the creation date told the real story, August 1999, 3 months after Sharon's passing. The timestamps showed Bill had been working on this computer in August, alternating between writing his Sunday sermons and crafting the fake suicide note. He'd type a few lines of sermon, then switch to working on the note, then back to the sermon. The digital evidence was absolutely irrefutable. Bill Guthrie had forged his own wife's supposed final words, trying to make it look like she'd taken her own life. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned to the courtroom, Bill's 3 daughters were all present. Suzanne sat on one side. Jenna Lou sat on the other. They wouldn't look at each other. The verdict: guilty of first-degree taking of life. Bill showed almost no reaction. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, Bill simply replied, "No, Your Honor." The sentence was mandatory: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Bill was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Some people in the gallery cried. Others looked relieved. The community of Woolsey had been torn apart by this case, and now, finally, there was some closure. But the damage was done. The family would never recover. Suzanne believed her father was guilty and cut off all contact. Jenna Lou maintained his innocence, convinced the evidence had been misinterpreted or planted. The 2 sisters stopped speaking to each other entirely. Sharon's body was exhumed and moved to Nebraska for reburial. Investigators finally took her fingerprints and compared them to the suicide note. They didn't match, confirming what the digital evidence had already proved. Bill had forged the entire thing. Bill Guthrie was sent to the South Dakota State Penitentiary in Sioux Falls. He filed multiple appeals over the years, all of which were denied. He claimed his attorney had been ineffective. He argued that search warrants were obtained illegally. He insisted he was innocent and that Sharon had taken her own life. In 2008, a state judge reviewed his case and found the evidence against him overwhelming. The judge cited 10 different pieces of trial evidence that proved Bill's guilt beyond any doubt. The affair, the pharmacy visits, the computer searches, the dry clothes, the forged suicide note, and more. On July 16, 2011, at the age of 66, William Guthrie passed away in prison. He'd served 11 years of his life sentence. Prison officials didn't immediately release details about his passing, only confirming that he'd been found unresponsive in his cell. Bill never admitted what he'd done. He maintained his innocence until the very end, insisting that Sharon had taken her own life and that he'd been wrongly convicted. But the evidence tells a different story. A story of a man who wanted out of his marriage, but feared the consequences of divorce. A man who spent weeks planning the perfect way to eliminate the obstacle standing between him and the life he wanted. A man who crushed sleeping pills into his wife's favorite drink, carried her unconscious body to the bathtub, and watched her drown. Sharon Guthrie was beloved by her community. She was a devoted mother, a caring children's minister, a woman who brought joy to everyone around her. Her only crime was being married to a man who saw her as an inconvenience rather than a partner. Bill Guthrie was a man who stood in the pulpit every Sunday and preached about morality, about love, about faith. But in private, he was conducting an affair, lying to his congregation, and planning his wife's demise. The case shattered the community of Woolsey. People who had trusted Bill, who had confided in him, who had sought his spiritual guidance, felt betrayed in the deepest possible way. Some members left town entirely, unable to reconcile their faith with what had happened. The United Presbyterian Church still stands in Woolsey, but the parsonage next door sat empty for years. New ministers came and went, but none stayed long. The shadow of Bill Guthrie's crimes lingered like a stain that couldn't be washed away. Detective Jerry Lindbergh kept the case file on his desk even after retirement. In 30 years of police work, He said he'd never encountered someone who planned elimination with such methodical precision. The computer searches weeks in advance. The duplicate prescriptions obtained through calculated lies. The forged suicide note created months after the crime. Every detail revealed a mind capable of extraordinary manipulation. The case became a landmark in digital forensics. Law enforcement agencies worldwide now teach the Guthrie investigation as the gold standard for computer evidence recovery. FBI forensic units study how Judd Robbins traced document timestamps, how he connected digital breadcrumbs across multiple devices, how he exposed lies buried in hard drives. Bill Guthrie's mistake wasn't in the planning. It was believing technology couldn't betray him. He thought deleting files meant they were gone forever. He thought nobody would think to check that second computer. He thought he could outsmart investigators with a forged note and a story about his suicidal wife. But digital evidence doesn't lie. Timestamps don't change. Deleted files can be recovered. And the truth, no matter how deeply buried, eventually surfaces. Sharon's grave in Nebraska receives fresh flowers regularly from strangers who heard her story and felt compelled to honor her memory. Her daughters remain estranged, their relationship another casualty of their father's deception. In the end, it wasn't prayer that solved Sharon Guthrie's case. It was science. The relentless pursuit of truth through forensic analysis, through careful examination of evidence, through refusal to accept the easy explanation. Bill Guthrie thought he could get away with the perfect crime. He was wrong. The digital fingerprints he left behind told a story more damning than any witness testimony. And those fingerprints sent him to prison for the rest of his life. Sometimes the most dangerous person isn't a stranger. Sometimes it's the person you trust most, the person you've built a life with, the person who stands at the altar and preaches about love while planning your demise. And sometimes justice comes not from divine intervention, but from the cold, hard facts that science reveals. The truth always comes out. Always.